Good morning, welcome to first lecture of rigid body mechanics, statics. Today I will introduce some basic definition. I will talk about the mechanics and I will define what is the statics, what is the mechanics and what are the basic quantities in the statics and so on. Let's start with mechanics, the definition of the classical mechanics, or we call it mechanics. If we want to define mechanics, mechanics is a branch of physics and it describes and predicts the state of rest or motion of bodies under the action of forces. So the definition of the classical mechanics, or we call it mechanics, is a branch of physics and it describes and predicts the state of rest or motion of bodies under the action of forces. Mechanics is divided into different subcategories. Let's look at those subcategories. So, mechanics is divided into rigid body mechanics, deformable body mechanics, and fluid mechanics. Rigid body mechanics is divided into two different subcategories. One of them we call it statics and another one is dynamics. So, static is the first course in engineering mechanics. In the old time, we had those in the course, the name of rigid body mechanics 1, rigid body mechanics 2, then we had deformable body mechanics, or they call it strength of materials, or sometimes they call it mechanics of material, and fluid mechanics. But these days, mechanic is divided to rigid body mechanics, deformable body mechanics and fluid mechanics. And rigid body mechanics is divided into statics and dynamics. So, static is the first course in engineering mechanics. This semester you will have statics, then you will have dynamics, then you will have mechanics of you will have deformable body mechanics or mechanics of material, or sometimes they call it strength of material. After that you will have fluid mechanics course. So these are engineering courses, they are core courses you should have in engineering, major in civil engineering, in mechanical engineering. They are very important. So in the statics is the study of bodies in equilibrium. So there is no motion in static. The bodies, they are in equilibrium. In static, we will divide bodies to the two different categories. One of them we call it particle, another rigid body. Let's see what is the particle, what is the rigid body. Rigid body is clear from name. In rigid body, we neglect the deformation, or if I want to define it, I should write a rigid body is an assembly of particles whose relative positions remain unchanged. It means there is no deformation. You know, all bodies under load, they will deform. We will have deformation. In some bodies, the deformation is large. We can see that. In some bodies, deformation can be very small and we cannot see those. But anyway, a real body under load, definitely we will have deformation. If the amount of deformation is very small and we neglect that deformation, we call it rigid body. So the rigid body, it means there is no deformation. We don't consider the deformation. In rigid body, the body has size and shape. So a rigid body has size and shape. So one body we will consider in the statics course, it is rigid body. In rigid body we don't have deformation, we neglect the deformation. It means deformation are very small and we don't consider those deformation. But rigid body has size and shape. We will consider the size of object. If size of object is small, we can model as a one point. In that case, we will consider that body as a particle. So, body in statics is divided into two categories. So, body, we will have two different kind of bodies. One of them, it is particle. Particle means object has mass but no size. We don't consider the size and shape. We model as a one point. Rigid body, it has mass, size and shape, but there is no deformation under load. So bodies in statics is divided into two categories. One of them, it is particle. It means it has a mass but no size and dimension. Another, it is rigid body. It means it has mass, size and shape, but we don't consider the deformation and we assume there is no deformation under load. Next topic you should know about the statics. It is basic quantities in statics. Basic quantities in statics, it is same as basic quantities in mechanics or physics. So we call it basic quantities. Basic quantities in physics or mechanics, we know one of them, it is length. If I want to define a length, I can say a measurement or extent of something from end to end. We call it length. So it describes the position of one particle or object respect to another point, the distance or the size and dimension of one object. Time. Another basic quantity is time. Time is defined as the duration in which all things happen. And or, if I want to define in another way, I can say is a measure in which events can be ordered from the past through the present into the future. Another basic quantity is force. So I define length, time. No. Let's see. The first basic quantity it is length, another one it is time. I define time. After that I should define mass. So another basic quantity is mass. After mass it is force. So another basic quantity is mass. Mass is a measure of the amount of matter in an object. We call it mass. Force is the push or pull on an object with mass that causes it to change velocity. So force is the push or pull on an object with mass that causes it to change velocity. Let's look at the unit of these basic quantities. For unit we will look at two different systems, one of them SI, another US customary system or British system. So let's look at the basic quantities. Length, time, mass, and force. Units, one of them international system or SI, another one it is US customary unit or British system. The unit for length in SI system it is meter. In US customary it is feet. For time in SI it is second. In US customary is second. Mass unit in SI system it is kilogram. US customary system, pay attention, it is slug. Most students, if I ask, they will tell it is pound. It is not pound. It is slug or pound mass. It is slug or pound mass. For force, it is Newton in SI system. In US customary system, it is pound. The right term, it is pound force. So, mass in US customary or British system, it is slug. Force, it is pound. Or pound mass, pound force. Let's review Newton's law. Of course, I know you know all these from high school, from physics 1, but let's review one more time. Let's I write here, Sir Isaac Newton's. He lived from 1642 to 1727. He developed 3 laws of motion. So let's I write here. He developed the 3 laws of motion and he published them in 1687. So from 1687 we know 3 laws of motion. Let's look at those one by one. They call it first law of motion or Newton's first law. So Newton's first law. First law says objects will remain at rest or in a uniform motion, in a straight line unless acted upon by an external unbalanced unbalanced force. We call it first law of motion or Newton's first law. Object will remain at rest or in a uniform motion in a straight line unless acted upon by an external unbalanced force. Second law of motion or Newton's second law. It says acceleration of an object depends on the mass of the object and the amount of force applied. So Newton's second law of motion, acceleration of an object depends on the mass of the object and the amount of force applied. It means force is equal to mass times acceleration. Or if I want to define in another way, I write one more definition. I can define the acceleration of an object as produced by a net force is directly proportional to the magnitude of the net force. In the same direction, as the net force. And inversely proportional to the mass of the object. In physics, we know this law F, force is equal to mass times acceleration. Newton's second law of motion. Let's look at today Newton's third law. Third law. This is again very well known. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So for any action there is a reaction magnitude equal, but the direction will be in inverse direction. These are three laws of motion first developed by Isaac Newton in 1687. I think as introduction for statics these are enough. So this is the first session. I briefly introduce what is statics. So please look at these terms, think about those. And this is the first session. It is only introduction for statics course. In the old time they used to call it Mechanics of Rigid Body 1. But after a while they changed the name of the course to the statics course. This is the first introduction course in the engineering. After this course you will have dynamics. Almost the concept is the same. Here all objects they are in equilibrium. There is no motion. In dynamic course object will move. Thank you so much for watching this lecture. See you next session. Bye bye.